This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
The heat is on.
Welcome back to American Heartland, and the heat is on in the midterm elections. We are getting closer and closer to that decisive vote. Big news regarding the midterm elections. One has to do with the campaign in Kentucky. The candidacy of Allison Lundgren Grimes is imploding right before our eyes, and Hillary Clinton is rushing to try to save her. And even bigger news for North Carolina, as Tom Tillis, the Republican Senate candidate, is now inching ahead of Kay Hagan, the incumbent Democratic senator. So we want to take this time to examine these key races. And before I do so, though, a small programming note. We're launching a new feature on American Heartland, and it is a letters section. I want to hear from you. If you have comment to make or questions to ask, or you just want to say hello, Dr. Grace, please email me at valuesthatneverdie@hotmail.com. So the email address is valuesthatneverdie@hotmail.com. Every week at the end of the show, I'm going to read your letters and give a response. I will choose a few of the most compelling, make them short, make them interesting, make them brilliant, and don't forget to include your name and the city or town in which you reside, your first name at least. I know that some of you want to keep your identity private, and I respect that. So send me a line, valuesthatneverdie@hotmail.com. Now to those midterms. Allison Lundgren Grimes, the Democratic Senate candidate in Kentucky, made a huge gaffe. She's trying to unseat Senator Mitch McConnell, and her candidacy blew up because in trying to distance herself from the president, she went too far. Listen to this.
Did you vote for President Obama, 2008, 2012?
You know, this election, it isn't about the president. It's about
making
sure we put Kentuckians back to work.
Did you vote for him?
I was actually in 08 a delegate for Hillary Clinton, and I think that Kentuckians know I'm a Clinton Democrat through and through. I respect the sanctity of the ballot box, and I know that the members of this editorial board do as well.
So you're not going to answer?
Again, I don't think that the president is on the ballot as much as Mitch McConnell might want him to be. It's my name, and it's going to be me who's holding him accountable for the failed decisions and votes that he has made against the people of Kentucky.
Did you notice that? She couldn't even say President Obama. She wanted to distance herself so badly from him that she just referred to him as president. Now, this is a trend going on across the country as you have Democratic candidates telling the president, stay away from our campaigns. They're even distancing themselves from Pelosi and from Reid. But Allison Lundgren Grimes went way too far, citing the sanctity of the ballot box for her refusal to say whether or not in 2008 she voted for Obama. Well, who else would she have voted for? And she's trying to run and hide behind Hillary Clinton, basically saying, I'm a Clinton Democrat. Well, what happened to the Clinton Democrats? Where are they? They were basically completely destroyed by the president. They don't even exist anymore. They were destroyed in 2010 when so many of the moderate Democrats were wiped out as the electorate said, no, we don't like Obamacare and we're going to punish you guys. And the moderate Democrats were completely wiped out. So these Clinton Democrats, I mean, they don't exist anymore. Her answer was pure amateur hour. And even the left-wing lunatics had to say that the candidacy of Allison Lundgren Grimes was fatally crippled. Listen to this.
Well, and the idea of, even to say you regret your vote, that would almost seem as disingenuous. But that is, and Kentuckians expect her to cast a tough vote on anything? Is she ever going to answer a tough question on anything? You want to be a U.S. senator? If you can't find a way to stand behind your party's president, You can disagree with him, but you can't answer that basic question and come across looking that ridiculous. I mean, I think she disqualified herself. I really do. I think she disqualified herself.
Doesn't this point to the issue that Democrats always had with her candidacy to begin with, that she wasn't very good on the, on the stump?
She doesn't have good instinct.
Yes.
Yeah, she didn't.
Well, you know what this does tell us, too? One of the key strategies that all Republican candidates should use in the midterms is ask that question. Ask the question in debate. Who did you vote for in 2008? Who did you vote for in 2012? Not just ask them to explain their voting record, but actually who they voted for. And put them on the defensive. You voted for the president. His policies have failed. What responsibility are you taking for this? And the response is going to be one of two, and both of them are going to give Republicans an advantage. Either they're going to have to dodge the question like Alison Lundergan Grimes, and then that makes them look extremely weak, because if they're not tough enough to answer a question directly, they're not tough enough to be senator. Or they're going to have to answer it by saying, yes, I voted for him in 2008. I also voted for him in 2012. And the public is going to say, well, do we want a repeat of this person who seemed to have bought the Obama line, hook, line, and sinker? Do we still want to go in that direction? Most of the country is saying the current direction of the country is wrong. We're on the wrong track. So this is one way that you can pigeonhole a Democrat and lead to collapsing poll numbers. Now, some of the other Democratic candidates are much more cagey. They're much more savvy than she was in answering this question. But it shows you the very line of questioning exposes these candidates. It opens them up to a whole range of very effective attacks. Big news in North Carolina. Big news. For months, the Democratic incumbent Senator Kay Hagan was running ahead of Tom Tillis, the Republican challenger. And recently, because of his a series of attack ads, because of his debate performances, he has risen in the polls. He has tied her. And for the first time, according to Real Clear Politics, he's now ahead. He's edging ahead of her. He's leading now by about 1.5 percentage points, according to the average of polls taken. And this means that the Republicans are pouring money into North Carolina. They have just decided to pour in about $6 million. A lot of attention going to this race. This race is going to be a bellwether race. If we take this seat from Kay Hagan, there's going to be a huge victory for Republicans across the country. So all eyes now on North Carolina, and I say also all hands on deck. Everybody do what you can to knock off Kay Hagan. And why? I'll give you a million reasons why. First of all, Kay Hagan has been blasted effectively for not having been proactive enough, just like the president, in policies that would have curtailed the rise of ISIS, which has proven to be a catastrophe in Iraq. She, in fact, was soundly criticized for having chosen to go to a fundraiser instead of a key committee hearing about ISIS. And she and her staff tried to lie to the American people about where she really was, and then it came out that she chose a fundraiser instead of a committee hearing. Listen to this.
We have a Democratic incumbent in North Carolina, another one of the great racists. I've heard a lot of great racists, and she's in a bit of hot water. She had a debate yesterday, and after the debate, she conceded. Her staff for months had been saying, had been saying that she missed a Senate hearing on ISIS because she was at another Senate hearing. Yesterday, after the debate, Kay Hagan, the Democratic incumbent, concedes, and you listen here, that she wasn't at another hearing. She was at a fundraiser.
You know, there was one. And what had happened at that hearing, it was scheduled early in the day. And then votes were scheduled, and that hearing then had to be postponed later that day. So, yes, I did miss that one.
Yes, she did miss that one, and that does happen sometimes. The schedule does get juggled around, but the staff knew where she was, and the staff was trying to suggest for some time that she was at another hearing. Does this have an impact on what she has been slightly ahead. This is one of the races Democrats have been happy about, where you have an embattled incumbent slightly ahead. Does something like this, her credibility, a fundraiser instead of an ISIS hearing, does that change that race?
You know, it's one of the surprising issues that Republicans have used, not just in North Carolina, but in New Hampshire and Iowa, the issue of missing committee hearings. And like you said, John, it happens a lot. It's not that uncommon.
Well, her credibility was badly damaged because her staff was not forthright. So basically, her staff was lying for her. And what did North Carolinians see in that moment? They saw that just like Obama, she often prefers fundraising rather than doing her job. And when she's caught red-handed, instead of coming clean, she prefers to dodge and lie until she has no choice but to tell the truth. So this was a really effective attack because it showed her to lack credibility and it pegged her as behaving in the same manner as President Obama. Well, ads by Americans for Prosperity have been extremely effective in also painting Kay Hagan as tone deaf. Just like the president has not heard the cries of the American people when they have said, we hate Obamacare, Kay Hagan has done the same, supporting Obamacare, even though the public has said loud and clear, this policy is full of problems and flaws, and we want major changes. Check out this ad, which has shown her to be just as tone deaf on Obamacare as Obama himself.
Women are the driving force of the new economy. They balance the family checkbook. They start businesses, create jobs. But Kay Hagan just doesn't get it. Instead of listening to North Carolina, Hagan continues to push for Obamacare. Hagan supports waivers for friends of Obama and special treatment for Congress and their staffs. And who gets stuck with the bill? Families and small businesses. Kay Hagan, taking care of Washington insiders, not North Carolina families. Tell Kay Hagan that's just wrong.
Bingo. Kay Hagan tries to present herself as compassionate. She tries to present herself as a champion of the middle class. She tries to present herself as on the side of the people. But you know what? In reality, she's a Washington insider who ultimately backs policies that further this culture of corruption. And that ad exposes that so brilliantly. And just like Obama, she is often caught not doing her job. In a recent debate, Tom Tillis asked her, instead of attending so many of the committee hearings, the Armed Services Committee hearings, of which she is a part, instead of attending those, you chose to go elsewhere. Where did you go? Where were you? What was more important? Especially since in North Carolina, there is a very large military community. They and their families need to know all of the latest information, all of the latest happenings on these committees. So why is your attendance on this committee so poor? This is what she said, dodging the question.
George, I'm on the Armed Services Committee.
Okay.
It
So
seems like what you're
I
saying
just
to
be
me,
clear and
Speaker
rephrase my
Tillis,
question.
I understand your question.
Okay.
Seems what you were saying is that I am not briefed on the issues at hand having to do in particular with ISIS. Please know that a year ago, this past spring, at a hearing, I actually asked about arming and training the moderate Syrian rebels at that time. That was actually before we knew what ISIS was. And I really think that if we had taken that step, we would not have seen the proliferation of these barbaric terrorists rise to the extent that they have today. Please know that I have chaired numerous counterterrorism hearings. I have met with General Dempsey, who's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary Hagel, on numerous occasions. Recently, we had a closed briefing and we had an open meeting with Secretary Hagel and General Dempsey. I asked numerous questions, and at the closed briefing, I was probably the last senator to leave after 3 or 4 hours of open dialogue about what we need to do as far as ISIS. So, folks, I am well informed on these issues. I have been decisive on what to do to take out ISIS in the Khorasan. But once again,
I have to ask the question, how does she know how well informed she is if she missed so many of the meetings? I mean, there was obviously information there that was transmitted that she doesn't know. And I also have to ask this question. She said she stayed longer than any other senator. She asked a lot of questions. Did she have to ask all these questions because she had missed so many previous meetings? Did she stay longer to make up for her failure before? I don't think she did herself any services by answering the question the way that she did. She didn't do herself any favor whatsoever. To me, it came across as dodging, and it also painted her again, just like Obama, a long-winded answer that's not forthright and that simply does not satisfy. Well, Tom Tillis has done a brilliant job attacking her voting record. And he keeps saying again and again, essentially a vote for her is a vote for Obama. Look at her voting record. Listen to his ad.
But Senator Hagan's record is different. She voted the Obama party line 96% of the time. I'm Tom Tillis. I approve this message. I'll stand up to the president, and I'll stand up for you.
Well, in the last debate, she tried to present herself as a moderate, not somebody who went whole hog with the president. Well, what are the facts? If you voted for the president's policies 96% of the time, that means there is no daylight between you and him. So a vote for Kay Hagan is a vote for Obama, pure and simple. And folks, if all of these points haven't convinced you that you need to do everything in your power to knock her out of her seat, then perhaps this ad will move you in a way that none will. Kay Hagan supports late-term abortions, just like Obama. She is so callous when it comes to the unborn who have no voice. Listen to this.
I was 23 weeks pregnant. I woke up having lots of stomach pain.
Becca's shaking me awake and saying I'm bleeding.
I did think when I saw the blood that we were probably losing the baby.
Doctors just come in and said, you have a choice. Do you want to try and keep her? We said, absolutely.
I didn't think at 24 weeks you could have a viable baby.
My daughter Charlotte was born at 24 weeks, 1 pound 7 ounces, 12 inches long.
Seeing her healthy and totally formed, it was the happiest moment of my life.
She's a human being that wants to live, that has a soul, that has a will, has a desire to live.
Charlotte today is the most loving kid. She has a big heart.
For those that are advocating late-term abortions, look at my daughter.
These are babies. This is human life, and we're their only voice.
Kay Hagan supports painful late-term abortions. She's too extreme for North Carolina. Women Speak Out PAC is responsible for the content of this ad.
Too extreme is an understatement. Cold and callous, just like the president she votes with all the time. And you know, the Democrats like to say that they are the ones who can support women's rights. Well, if you think of little baby Charlotte, that's the kind of little baby girl that Kay Hagan has no compassion for. So where's your sympathy for the weakest females in our land? There is none in Kay Hagan's heart. I encourage all of you in North Carolina, get proactive. There is no difference between Kay Hagan and President Barack Obama. Knock her out, and that knocks him out. You're listening to Dr. Grace, upholding values that never die.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
I want to talk about me, I want to talk about number one. Oh my, me, my, what I think, what I like, what I know, what I want, what I see. I like talking about you usually. But occasionally, I want to talk about me.
Welcome back. This is Dr. Grace. And you know who wants to talk about him. It's Scott Brown in New Hampshire. It's all about him. It's always about him. It's not about the people of Massachusetts. It's not about New Hampshire. It's not about the U.S. Senate. It's not about the USA. It's about him. And guess what, folks? Scott Brown is now in a tight contest with his Democratic opponent for a seat in the Senate, Jeanne Shaheen. And you know what he needs? He needs the votes of conservatives. If he only had the votes of conservatives, if he only had the votes of Tea Party folks, he could close that gap and maybe he could win. So the talk of New England is, should conservatives vote for Scott Brown? Should they come out and support him? And this is the talk of the town, of the area. And why? Because perhaps, maybe, just maybe, that extra Senate seat is going to make the difference between the Republicans having the majority or the Republicans remaining in the minority. So you've got lots of arguments being made on both sides. And I have a very simple question to ask folks who are pondering this. Is Scott Brown a champion of conservative values? No. Is Scott Brown a champion of Tea Party values? No. Is Scott Brown consistently a champion of Republican values? No. So what good is Scott Brown? He's useless. Do you know what this guy does? He literally puts his finger up in the air and he says, what should I do and say to get myself elected at this current moment in time? And you know what happens when he is elected? Because we do have a record to go on. He was a senator of Massachusetts. He'll put his finger up in the air when it's time to cast a vote and say, what should I do and say at this current time? When it was inconvenient for him to be on the side of the people once he was elected as senator, he voted for Dodd-Frank. When it was inconvenient for him to support gun rights, he voted against gun rights in the Senate. Now it appears it's not so convenient for him in New Hampshire to be so clearly pro-choice. So he's kind of softening that position. What good is Scott Brown? Folks, the guy is useless. Now he wants us to believe that he's going to stand for issues that we care about. Listen to this ad that Scott Brown is running.
Anyone who turns on the TV these days knows we face challenges to our way of life. Radical Islamic terrorists are threatening to cause the collapse of our country. President Obama and Senator Shaheen seem confused about the nature of the threat. Not me. I want to secure the border, keep out the people who would do us harm, and restore America's leadership in the world. I'm Scott Brown, and I approve this message, because protecting the homeland is the first step to making America strong again.
Well, you know what, Scott? You think that any of us are going to believe that if you're elected to the U.S. Senate and suddenly the New York Times and the Washington Post starts to say there's a comprehensive immigration reform bill that needs to be passed for the good of the nation, you, Scott Brown, the man of steel, are going to stand firm and say, no, not I, representing New Hampshire, I will not, because the border needs to be secured. I don't buy it, not for a minute. This guy puts his finger up in the wind at any given moment. He is useless, and we conservatives should not back him. Don't sell your soul for this charlatan. It's not worth it. And to everybody out there that's fear-mongering, I say, shut up. There's a lot of people saying, what if Scott Brown is the key difference between us being in the majority or us being in the minority? Listen, if you have a useless senator up there who is probably going to vote Democratic or Rhino, it doesn't make a difference. You still don't get a majority with this guy. And an even more compelling argument is this. How do you know? How do you know if it's New Hampshire that's going to be the tipping point? Nobody knows that. At this current stage, it looks like Republicans might capture the Senate by 52 or 53 votes. So if New Hampshire is number 53, that means you're asking conservatives to betray their principles to get a guy in there that we don't actually want or need. So how do you know how it's all going to shake out? Perhaps we're going to win without Scott Brown. You know what I think is a great scenario? That we win the majority in the Senate and Scott Brown loses in New Hampshire. That's what I want. And I have the right to say, I'm not going to vote for him. And you out there have the right to say, he's not good enough for me. Especially since if there's one person who has contempt for the people, contempt for the conservative base, contempt for the Tea Party, it's Scott Brown. Well, I'm done with you. And don't turn to me now in your moment of need. Now, you have rejected us. Now you need me and you're coming on your hands and knees asking for my vote? No way. Get out of my face. Get out of my face. Get lost. And you know what? I want to point out to everybody out there. You're always hearing this talk about what political consultants are saying we should and shouldn't do. Political consultants, I can tell you this from being in Washington, D.C., are a bunch of losers. They're people who have been fired from other jobs looking to get a job somewhere else. So they're losers. Don't rely on their analysis. They're a bunch of losers who care about themselves. And you know what? They have this strategy that they tell these Republicans. You go as far to the right during the primary, so you win the primary. Then you go as far as you can to the center, so you get the center vote, and perhaps you peel off some independents. And then conservatives are faced with this challenge. Either you vote for a rhino, or you vote for a liberal, or you stay home, and consultants whisper in their ear, and you know what? They're going to have nowhere else to go but to vote for you. Well, guess what, you moronic political consultants? We do have a choice. We see through your strategy. We're not going to reward that strategy. And we're not going to reward these individuals who we can't trust. We can't rely on them. We don't like them, and we don't even want them in our party. I say to the conservatives, send a statement to Scott Brown, to the rhinos, to the Republican Party, and to all the political consultants out there. You want our vote, you better adhere to our values, and you better stand up for our values, not just some of the time, all of the time. And you know what my fantasy is? That in this election, we not only capture the Senate, but we send a message to Scott Brown. You carpetbagger. Let him lose. And let's send a message to the Republican establishment. This strategy doesn't work with us. Get lost and get out of our face. That's my message to Scott Brown. And to all you conservatives out there, stand your ground. Don't vote for the, let me be a lady, for the other turncoat, carpetbanger, and unreliable candidate there in the race, Scott Brown. Stay home. Now, on to other factors. Kay Hagan, another key race in North Carolina where this show is broadcast. Kay Hagan neck and neck with Tom Tillis. But guess what? Somebody else who has just been discovered. It's all about me, 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 me. Kay Hagan does not deserve your vote. She presents herself as a champion of the people, and guess what we have just discovered? She supported Obama's stimulus package, and who got some of that money? Her husband and her son in an energy company that they own. And they had put together a proposal to get money from the stimulus bill when their project actually went under budget. They didn't even return the people's money back to them. They kept the money. That's Kay Hagan, another individual who pretends to be on the side of the people. But when she goes to Washington, you know whose side she's on? She's on her own side. She's on her husband's side. She's on her son's side. You? She could care less about you. Listen to this really effective ad that is being run in North Carolina.
I'm Tom Tillis. I approve this message.
Days after Kay Hagan took office, she pushed Obama's stimulus bill.
This bill will help this country move forward.
It didn't, but it did help Kay Hagan move forward personally.
Kay Hagan's husband, Chip, and his brothers own a company called JDC. They got a $390,000 grant in stimulus funding.
Grants tucked away in Obama's stimulus paid the Hagans. She's 96% for Obama, 100% for herself.
You know what I suggest? I suggest that Kay Hagan and Scott Brown spend some time together because they're two peas in a pod. It's all about themselves. And the minute they get to Washington, they have an elitist attitude. They scoff at the electorate back home. They look down upon the electorate back home. They are too good for the rest of us. We're only useful as a stepping stool for them. That's all we are. That's all the electorate is. Once they're there, they like to press a lot of flesh with even more important, powerful people, build their own careers, build their own names, and line their pockets as much as they can. As for principle, they don't have any. As for love of the people, they don't have any of that. And it is my hope and prayer that the Democratic Kay Hagan goes down in defeat, that we don't know what he is, Scott Brown goes down in defeat in New Hampshire, and that the Republicans nonetheless win the Senate. I think that if we stand for principle all the time, not some of the time, that's how we create a really good conservative movement, a really effective Republican Party, and a really strong majority in the American Senate. You're listening to Dr. Gray's Upholding Values That Never Die.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on the farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm. Spend a little more in the store.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I am your host, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. Thank you for joining me once again on an edition of American Heartland. It is such a pleasure to have you listen to the show. It is my honor to be here behind this mic. And yet again, unfortunately, this week, we begin the broadcast with a very, very heavy heart. I do not have enough tears to shed for the victims of terrorist attacks this week in Canada, especially the Canadian reservist Nathan Cirillo, who was standing watch over Canada's National War Monument. And what happened? He was shot by a vicious terrorist, Michael Zehaf Bebo. This individual also stormed the Canadian Parliament. And by the grace of God, the Sergeant at Arms, Kevin Vickers, shot him dead before he killed even more people. Also this week, another terrorist, Martin Rouleau-Couture, attacked two soldiers in a strip mall in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu in Quebec. And one of these soldiers was killed in this attack, a hit and run. Both terrorists were killed by authorities, and nonetheless, Canada is in shock, is in mourning, and is literally upside down. The after effects of this are going to be profound. Let me begin on a personal note. Both attacks have affected me extremely deeply, and it's not just because Canada is where I was born. Canada is where I spent 30 years of my life before moving to the United States. But even more so, I return to Canada frequently, every couple of months. And in particular, that place where the hit and run occurred, Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu in Quebec, I am there really often. Since we moved to Massachusetts, where I currently reside, I often take my 2 children, put them in the back seat of my SUV, and we will drive from Boston to Laval, where I currently still have family, Laval, Quebec. And one of the places where we often stop on our way there is Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. And I'll tell you why. If you've driven with 2 little kids, you know you're stopping all the time. And shortly after we cross into the Canadian border, my children are often extremely restless, and so am I. And we're looking for a good place to stop. And there's this long, winding, rural road. You go up it for what seems like forever. And finally, when you hit Highway 10 and you look for a place to get off, Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu is one of the best places to get off. There's a great Tim Hortons. And I remember thinking a couple of times when I'm there, this place is just so peaceful. It's so serene. Nothing ever happens here. And in moments when I'm generally going to Canada, I'm escaping my life from the U.S., I'm escaping my work, and I'm escaping all the bad news. And I've had the thought, you know, this place is serene. Wouldn't it be fun to live here or be here? There's not the same stresses that I encounter every day. So you can imagine my personal shock at this, that a place where you would think nothing is ever going to happen here, that is where these vicious terrorists have struck. And then when you think about the other attack, the attack on Canada's Parliament, Ottawa, what a beautiful, serene capital city. In fact, as a young professor, I taught at the University of Ottawa. It was one of my first teaching jobs. I was still a graduate student at McGill University, and I had a couple of classes that I was teaching at McGill. And then once a week, I would drive. It's about an hour and a half from Montreal. I would drive to the University of Ottawa, and there I taught a course in French. And I always marveled at the beauty of the city. And of course, I've been there many, many times. It's the capital of Canada. And my husband and I have walked close to the Parliament. So serene, so peaceful. Again, you think stuff doesn't happen here. This is a safe haven in the world. And it's not just that I am heartbroken at this young reservist that was killed. This young reservist, he didn't serve in Afghanistan. He didn't serve anywhere. He was essentially doing a very benign, patriotic job. What did he do to deserve that attack? What did he do to deserve that? Nothing. What has Canada done to deserve this? Now, granted, yes, they have participated in the war in Afghanistan. They are allies of the United States. They are participating in this bombing campaign. But essentially, Canada is known as a peace-loving nation, rallying usually in the most extreme cases of self-defense. They're not known as the warmongers of planet Earth. So what does this incident teach us? It teaches us that nobody is safe anywhere. Nobody is safe anywhere. Because it doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. ISIS is coming after us. These terrorists are coming after us. They are coming after us when we least suspect it. They are coming after us in any way, shape, or form. They shot the young reservist. They ran over the other soldiers in Canada. And then this week, another heartbreaking incident. A man with a hatchet attacking police officers. Nobody is safe anywhere. I've been saying this for a long time, and I think the incident this week really drives that point home. Now, there is a silver lining in all of this. What a remarkable moment when that Sergeant at Arms, Kevin Vickers, took it upon his own initiative to shoot that man dead. And I know that lots of you probably had tears in your eyes watching the remarkable standing ovation that he was given in the Canadian Parliament. He single-handedly saved so many lives. That carnage would have been even greater had it not been for this man's simple heroism. His modesty and his grace under fire shine through. What a Canadian hero he truly is. But you know, when we talk about this incident, we know for sure this was clearly a terrorist attack upon us by radical jihadists, folks now who are being radicalized even at home by their very own computers, folks who may not have any link whatsoever to any cell. And that shows us just how grave and pervasive the dangers we face now are. Now, how has President Obama responded to all of this? In his usual, I'm a nincompoop kind of a way, stuttering and stammering, failing to articulate clearly and concisely and lucidly what we all know. Listen to Obama responding to questions on this incident.
Well, we don't have enough information yet. So as we understand better exactly what happened, this obviously is something that we'll make sure to factor in the ongoing efforts that we have to counter terrorist attacks in our country. Every single day we have a whole lot of really smart, really dedicated, really hard-working people, including a couple in this room, who are monitoring risks and making sure that we're doing everything we need to do to protect the American people. And they don't get a lot of fanfare. They don't get a lot of attention. There are a lot of possible threats that are foiled or disrupted that don't always get reported on. And the work of our military, our intelligence teams, the Central Intelligence Agency, the intelligence community more broadly, our local law enforcement and state law enforcement officials who coordinate closely with us. We owe them all a great deal of thanks. All right? Thank you, guys.
He's Mr. President. He's always stammering. He can't even speak straight. And have you noticed? He tends to say nothing at all. So unbecoming the commander-in-chief, so unbecoming the leader of the free world when a fellow ally is attacked. Even Chris Matthews, his ally in the media, couldn't stomach the president's response to this recent wave of terrorist activity. Listen to this.
But definitely, that is going to be something that will be debated and discussed, no doubt.
I just wonder, Michelle, when the President of the United States says senseless violence, this is very purposeful violence. This is political. It seems to me, well, you tell me what the people up there feel. This is aimed at changing Canadian policy towards ISIS. It's not senseless. It may be horrible and ruthless, but it does have a point.
Well, we don't know the circumstances either, both the Monday's attack or today. Both the shooters the shooter and the suspect who was in the car, they were both killed. But definitely who they chose as targets would lead you to believe that there was definitely a message that was being sent. I agree.
Absolutely, a clear message was sent. This is obviously part of a campaign to continue to terrorize the West and to send the message that any attacks on the new caliphate which ISIS is creating is going to get counterattacks everywhere. The president should be speaking forcefully about what is going on, but he isn't. He's not speaking forcefully nor is he acting forcefully, as it looks like ISIS continues to make inroads in Iraq, and some of the latest reports are, how much of a threat are they to Baghdad? How much of a threat are they to the American embassy in Baghdad? Those fears are escalating, and that shows that the recent airstrike campaign is doing very, very little to stop ISIS from marching forward. So the president, again, in dealing with an attack on the dearest ally of the United States, Canada, what can he do? Stammer and stutter and fail to act forcefully. And this shows, too, that when you have such a weak, pathetic leader of the free world like Obama, no American ally is safe. Essentially, American allies back the United States because they feel that it's in their interest to do so. They feel that together we're all going to make a more secure world. But with this man leading an alliance, a coalition, it's almost useless to back him because there's no strength there. There's no determination there. There's no will there. And there's no forthright discussion of what is really going on. Under this man's watch, the greatest threat that America has ever faced has incubated, has grown, is on the march, and is attacking American allies and American people everywhere and anywhere. This disaster is on Obama's head. It's going to render him a pariah in the history books for years to come. The Canadians will survive. Ultimately, the Americans will survive. But this black stain on Obama's record will be there forever. You're listening to Dr. Grace, upholding values that never die.
I just walked in to find you here with that sad look upon your face. I should have changed that stupid lock. I should have made you leave your key. If I'd have known for just 1 second, you'd be back to bother me. Go on now, go.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue, flying high on a farm.
Welcome to American Heartland. This is Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com. Every week, upholding values that will never die. Thank you so much for joining me today. Unfortunately, the news again is bad. The nation is now gripped in Ebola, fear, anxiety, and perhaps even panic. Some people are asking, why is President Obama not being proactive? More proactive. Why did he allow that Liberian man to come into this country when we knew the source of this disease comes from West Africa? Why are not all flights from that area currently banned? He told us that we wouldn't have this problem in the United States, but that is not true. And Ebola fears are spreading as a second nurse has been diagnosed, a second nurse who treated the original Ebola patient who died, and she is now being rushed for treatment herself. Unfortunately, she took a flight to Cleveland, and now everyone who was on that flight, especially the returning flight, at that point she had the symptoms, is being contacted. So it looks like Ebola is in the United States, and it is spreading. It is spreading quite rapidly. Now, to answer the first question, why has Obama not been proactive enough? I'll tell you why. Everything he does has fundamentally a political motive. What he wants to do is send a message to especially his African American base, to come out and vote for him during the midterms. So he's much, much more interested in sending them the signals that he wants to send to get them energized to vote than he is in protecting the rest of us. And I'll tell you what I mean. All of his efforts are focused on the disease in West Africa. He has sent American troops there, and he may be sending even more troops there to build centers to help that area of the world contain the virus. He says that that's in our national security interest. Well, Mr. President, it's just as much in our national security interest for you to ban incoming flights from that part of the world. But the point is this: the president desperately needs African Americans to come out and vote for him during the midterms. So he wants to send the signal that he is standing with them, with especially their West Africans, brothers and sisters or relatives, family members, or just an affinity with West Africa. He wants to send the signal that he cares just as much about their well-being and as much about their economy. Because one of the reasons that the CDC has said again and again is we can ban flights there is because it would affect their economy. The president wants to send the signal to African Americans that he cares about poor blacks dying there. And it's very clear that his focus is more on West Africa than it is on the United States. Everything he has said to try to reassure us is simply not working. So that's one reason. Another reason he's trying to damp down fears here in the United States is he understands that the more we realize what a danger Ebola is to this country, the more it's going to affect the economy. This week, we had a tremendous scare on the stock market where stocks tumbled dramatically based on this Ebola crisis. And the president, facing what looks like a shellacking in the midterms, is eager to try to calm everybody down so that there isn't a further effect on the American economy. And let me tell you, quite frankly, from a personal point of view, and I'm sure that this scenario that I'm going to describe is being replicated all over the country. Before this Ebola crisis, my family and I were jubilant because we were thinking about the Thanksgiving holiday coming up. My husband has vacation time during Thanksgiving and the week after. We began to look at foreign destinations. Where should we go? Should it be St. Lucia? Should it be Aruba? Should it be Bermuda? We were so excited. And my sister was going to join us, my sister who lives in Scottsdale. And recently, she and I have been texting one another, no flying, let's not go anywhere. It's too dangerous. I don't want to get on a plane. I'm not getting on a plane. She doesn't want to get on a plane. In addition, we'd been talking about the Christmas holidays. Is my sister and my niece from Montreal going to come over? Is my sister in Scottsdale going to come over to our home to enjoy Christmas? Right now, the texts and phone conversations we're having is nobody move. Call us paranoid. Nobody get on a plane. Now, this conversation that we're having, I'm sure is being replicated all across the country. And it's going to have a tremendous effect on our economy. It already is beginning to have a tremendous effect on our economy. It's going to destroy whatever tenuous recovery we have had. It's going to be a tremendous setback. It is inevitable. And I got to tell you how immediate this Ebola crisis is striking my family. My brother-in-law works a couple of miles out of Cleveland. He's a doctor. And he says that in his particular clinic, there are tons and tons of doctors who regularly go to West Africa and back to the United States. They do so to go to conferences. And in my recent conversation with my sister-in-law, she's petrified that he might contract something. And they are begging, they're wishing for some kind of a travel ban. In addition, because that nurse traveled to Cleveland, they fear, and I fear, for my nephews who live in Cleveland. What if this thing spreads from the passengers who may have contracted it from that nurse? And again, when we talked about no family member is going to take a plane during Thanksgiving, we then began the other conversation. Hey, should we just hop in a car and go see our nephews in Cleveland? And now we're thinking, no, stay the hell away from Cleveland. So if my own family is a microcosm of how we're not going to spend as much as we would have otherwise spent, we're not going to travel as much as we would otherwise have traveled during this holiday season, you think about the impact that this is going to have across the entire country, especially since from Thanksgiving into Christmas is one of the key spending periods in the nation. It is the time when so many retailers make the biggest bucks, and it is the time when so much of the entire travel industry reaps big bucks. So the consequences of this Ebola scare for our economy are tremendous. And that's another reason why the president is not really being forthcoming with the American people. He's trying to act like, hey, this is just a cakewalk. We'll get this under control. Listen to his most recent statements.
I want to use myself as an example just so that people have a sense of the science here. I shook hands with, hugged, and kissed, not the doctors, but a couple of the nurses at Emory because of the valiant work that they did in treating one of the patients. They followed the protocols, they knew what they were doing, and I felt perfectly safe doing so. And so this is not a situation in which, like a flu, the risks of a rapid spread of the disease are imminent. If we do these protocols properly, if we follow the steps, if we get the information out, then the likelihood of widespread Ebola outbreaks in this country are very, very low.
Well, this doesn't reassure me one little bit. If I were the president, I would monitor my health going forward very carefully. If a fever breaks out, sir, you should take great precautions with that fever. In fact, I find this statement even more alarming because on top of anybody else who may have been affected, now we have to worry about whether our own president will come down with this disease. I mean, I think that his comments are absolutely nutty. His attempts to tamp down fear are actually backfiring, and they're backfiring because his tone should be one of concern and alarm, recognizing what we're up against. That would be more reassuring. But when you try to downplay a situation in which folks who get this are either dying or coming very close to dying, if you're not acknowledging how grave it is and how worried the American people are about it and how these protocols in some cases are not being properly followed, if you're not acknowledging all of that, then we can't be reassured by anything that you're saying. In addition, the White House press secretary was asked, well, why on earth are you not doing the basic ban flights from West Africa? And this is what he had to say.
Just two quick ones. Still no consideration of a travel ban from the affected countries in Africa.
That's something that is not on the table at this point. And again, the reason for that, just in case people haven't heard the previous answer that I've given to this question, it's important for people to understand exactly why that's the case. Shutting down travel to that area of the world would prevent the expeditious flow of personnel and equipment into the region. And the only way for us to stop this outbreak and to eliminate any risk from Ebola to the American public is to stop this outbreak at the source. So we are mobilizing significant resources to make sure that supplies and personnel can get to the affected region and start meeting the needs of the affected region so that we can stop the outbreak there. And that's why right now the travel ban is not on the table.
Well, this is absolute nonsense. What the president needs is to enact a twofold strategy. Do everything you can to stop the outbreak at the source, but also And I would say the first priority is make sure that we no longer have any infected people coming into this country, because you're only going to make the situation worse if that's the case. Well, this is a weak, incompetent, and gaffe-prone administration, and that is on display almost on a daily basis. Their lack of proactive measures on Ebola is a case in point. But, no matter how bad the news gets, you always have Susan Rice putting the National Security Advisor, putting her foot in her mouth every single time. Listen to what she said about Turkey.
Our interest is in the following. First of all, the Turks have, just in the last several days, made a commitment that they will, in the first instance, allow the United States and our partners to use Turkish bases and territory.
And what an embarrassing moment that was, because subsequently, the Turks let it be known that no such deal had been struck. And this reminds us that Obama can't make good decisions because he's surrounded by fellow incompetents. You'll remember how she put her foot in her mouth when it came to explaining what had happened in Benghazi. And then she followed that up by telling us that Bo Bergdahl had served with honor and distinction, and that his coming home was a joyous occasion for the American people, even though we had swapped 5 Taliban commanders to get him back. Not only had she put her foot in her mouth so deep in explaining how Bo Bergdahl had served, she followed that up, if you remember, by putting her foot in her mouth even deeper, defending the phrase that this obvious deserter had served with honor and distinction. Check this out.
I realize there's been a lot of discussion and controversy around this, but what I was referring to is the fact that this was a young man who volunteered to serve his country in uniform at a time of war. That is itself a very honorable thing. But
honor and distinction.
Jim, really, I mean, this is a young man whose circumstances we are still going to learn about. He is, as all Americans, innocent until proven guilty. He's now being tried in the court of public opinion after having gone through an enormously traumatic 5 years of captivity. His parents the same. I think what we need to care most about is his health and well-being and recovery. There'll be an opportunity, and the military has committed to review the circumstances of his capture. If there is a consequence that results from that will be delivered. But in the meantime, let's remember, this is a young man who volunteered to serve his country. He was taken as a prisoner of war. He suffered in captivity. He's now trying to begin the process of recovery. Let's let that happen, and then let's know the facts, including his side of the story, and then we can make a judgment.
Well, that was Susan Rice, totally tone deaf regarding Bo Bergdahl. By the way, we're still waiting for the military to give us a full review of his activities there. That's another thing the administration is just trying to brush under the rug. However, there we go. Susan Rice, another gaffe this week, a really embarrassing gaffe, and it sends the message to the American people that this president is incompetent, and he surrounds himself by incompetent people, and therefore we have no confidence, zero confidence, that he's going to get this Ebola crisis under control.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.